He is the master of the axis of evil, and he wears the greatest mask in all of comic book history. Today we're exploring Captain America's greatest villain on Comicology. Imagine everything evil about humanity. Imagine the coldest, most vile human you can come up with. Now put him in a Red Skull mask. Now you're imagining the kind of crap that Captain America had to deal with way back in the Golden Age. So Red Skull first appeared right alongside Captain America in the last story of his first issue. Remember, back then comic books had multiple stories just in one issue. You didn't need to buy 6 of them to get one story. I'm not sure if he was envisioned as the primary foe for Captain America when he first started, but it certainly ended up that way. I cannot imagine a more perfect enemy for Cap. He is the perfect antithesis of that character. Where Cap is strong and patriotic and compassionate, the Red Skull is clever and stoic, and he is incredibly selfish. Where Cap is always fighting for the people around him, the Red Skull is always implementing devious plans and sacrificing those around him to achieve his goals. So how did this evil character come to be? Well, we don't actually know. At least not at first, because the first appearance of the Red Skull doesn't explain his origin at all. In fact, his origin is never explained in the entirety of the Golden Age. This is something that would later be retconned by writers of modern comics, but essentially he was trained to be the perfect German operative, like a spy. However, he was not trained for combat, he was trained for espionage. Like I said, where Captain America is strong, the Red Skull is really smart. Though in some instances, the Red Skull is shown to have the same strength and durability as Captain America, but in my opinion, the Red Skull is at his best when he's matching strength with clever tactics and his ruthless espionage empire. He is a foe who doesn't need strength, and he shouldn't need strength to achieve his goals. And that, in general, was an appealing trait for villains in the Golden Age. The Red Skull has a genius-level intellect, and he's an expert in multiple educational disciplines. However, he has a particular aptitude towards politics, economics, and military strategy. He is also gifted with incredible charisma. He is top level in organizational skills. He is always leading a group and always has henchmen available. In fact, he operates his own regiment of Nazi operatives, including several high-class villains who are supremely loyal to him. Many would even die for him. But enough talk about the character. Let's dive into his first story. It's called The Riddle of the Red Skull. The story begins as Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes are escorting a major to his home. Apparently, a crazy character calling himself the Red Skull has issued some sort of threat on the major's life, but foolishly he isn't taking the threat very seriously. He sends Steve and Buck away so that he can be alone. This turns out to be a huge mistake, because the Red Skull shows up immediately. There is a struggle, but ultimately the Skull wins over and the Major is murdered. Also, it happens seemingly out of nowhere with no other murder weapons other than the Skull's deadly stare. So essentially, the Red Skull has this ability, and it's only an ability that he has in his first appearance, kind of only in the Golden Age. But basically, he looks directly in your eyes, and it makes you so afraid that you die. And this is not a hallmark of the character as he is now, but it's, if anything, it's a fairly generic trait given to several villains in the Golden Age, not just the Red Skull. And it's something a writer would use when he doesn't really know what to do with the character, which makes sense since this is the Skull's first appearance, and he lacks all of his relevant history and development. The next day, the body of the Major is discovered, but nobody can figure out how he died. The only thing that they do know is that the Red Skull was involved, and so Steve Rogers and Bucky decide it's time for Captain America and his sidekick to get involved. Except this time, Cap decides this case is just too dangerous, and he leaves Bucky behind. Bucky is upset that his mentor would leave him behind and decides to investigate the case on his own. Meanwhile, the Red Skull returns to his hideout to address his troops. He explains that his goal is nothing less than to overthrow the entire American government. Bucky is lucky enough to stumble upon this meeting, but is immediately discovered when he gives his position away. Bucky does his best to overcome the thugs, but he's no match for the Red Skull's menace, and so he is captured and interrogated by the Red Skull himself. Without warning or explanation, Captain America appears to rescue his sidekick. He kicks the crap out of all the Red Skull's henchmen with his superior strength and agility. He is able to put down every member of the Skull's gang, but the Skull himself, who escapes through a trick door. So the only thing I don't get is, how did Cap know where Bucky was? I don't know. The only explanation is that he used Bucky as bait to find the location of the Red Skull. But how did he know that Bucky would find the Red Skull? I don't know. I don't know. I'm thinking too much. The next day, the boys are introduced to George Maxon of the Maxon Aircraft Corporation. He's developed a new plane for the Army to use, and he showed up at the base to personally see it take off. This fails, however, when the plane suddenly combusts for seemingly no reason at all. Cap immediately suspects sabotage, but Maxon doesn't seem too disturbed by the accident. The General takes Maxon home and promises to investigate what happened. Afterward, the General returns home to discover that somebody has sent him a package. If he opens it, he's an idiot. The General opens the package and discovers that there's a Red Skull inside with a note threatening to kill him. Then suddenly the Red Skull appears and uses his death gaze to put an end to the General forever. Cap shows up, but he's too late. The Red Skull smashes a chair into his head, knocking him out. Then he goes about staring into the Cap's eyes in hopes that it will kill him. Meanwhile, Bucky looks on from the outside. Fortunately, Bucky decides to help out and smashes into the skull. Then Cap makes a full recovery and punches the skull so hard in the face that his mask shatters, revealing that the true menace of the Red Skull is actually George Maxon, the plane manufacturer. George Maxon explains that his plan was to sabotage the United States for Hitler, who promised to make him the ruler of all American industry after the Nazi takeover. In fact, he was never killing anyone with his gaze. He was actually using a hypodermic needle to poison them and make it look like he had supernatural powers. Then, in a struggle, he accidentally stabs himself and dies by his own poison. So that's it. The Red Skull is dead immediately as soon as he shows up in the first issue. Dead. Killed by his own poison. A great trope that a lot of Golden Age writers use. The villain always ends up killing himself because the hero won't do it. The hero can't look bad, so the villain has to do it for him. So here we are, sitting here. George Maxon is dead. The menace of the Red Skull is over. But for some of you learned viewers out there, I know you're out there, you guys are thinking to yourself, George Maxon? That's not the Red Skull. You're absolutely right. This isn't the true Red Skull. This is just the first appearance of the Red Skull. George Maxon is a nobody. He's an industrialist who doesn't have very much history in this universe at all. The true Red Skull is a far more intelligent and far more dangerous man named Johan Schmidt. At this point in Cap's continuity, we don't know where he is, we don't know what he's doing, but George Maxon is actually only his first appearance. I don't know if they're related at all, but that's how it goes. George wears the mask to complete his crimes. It's unclear if it's inspired by or otherwise related to the real-life Red Skull, but for our purposes, let's just consider him to be the first interpretation of the character. So now we have the next story in which we learn that good old George Maxon is not actually dead. He is actually immune to his own toxin, and after being left for dead by the authorities, he has made a full recovery and is now back to his old shenanigans as the Red Skull. And this time he's actually got a new weapon, right? So last time he had the death gaze and he would look you in the eye and you would die. But this time he's actually developed a new way to kill people. He kills them just by touching them. More on this later. We cut to Fort Lehigh, where Steve Rogers and Bucky are attending a meeting with several military officials. They are discussing a brand new giant drill they are going to somehow use to advance their cause. Then they disperse the secret drill plans to one of their majors, who returns home with it. The Red Skull intercepts the major and attempts to steal the plans. The major tries to defeat the Red Skull, but as we can see here, anyone who touches him succumbs to a swift and painful death. The Skull takes the plans and leaves right before Cap and Bucky show up to discover the murder. Cap and Bucky hit the streets to find the Red Skull. Luckily, they come upon some of his henchmen pretty quickly and beat some answers out of them. Meanwhile, the Red Skull has used his vast wealth and industrial resources to build the unstoppable drill for his own devious purposes. Then, in a brilliant display of its destructive power, he uses the drill to destroy an entire city. Thousands of people die as he brings entire skyscrapers to the ground. Cap and Bucky mount the drill and try to stop it, but they're powerless against its impenetrable armor and are forced off of it by its great mechanical power. So that was intense. He just leveled an entire city using a secret military drill. It's insane. This is actually one of the biggest events that occurs in the golden age of Marvel history. But the story actually takes kind of a shift here. We don't actually hear about the drill for another several pages. Across town we see two thugs who look eerily like Captain America and Bucky. They are given costumes and set up to look just like the patriotic heroes. Their idea is that people will pay big money to meet the famous duo, and they plan on taking advantage. They set up shop, and at first it works exactly as planned. Everybody is interested and everybody wants to pay money to meet the famous duo. That is until, of course, the real Captain and Bucky show up and beat the crap out of them. After getting the beating of a lifetime, they decide they want to quit the scam, until right at that moment when the Red Skull shows up to take bloody revenge on his enemies. He kidnaps the thugs thinking they're the real-life Captain America and Bucky, and then using the gallows he hangs them both. They're both dead and Cap doesn't even try to save them. Instead, he goes straight for the Red Skull, but he can't touch him because of his death touch. That is until Bucky discovers that the actual death grip is just a trick. It's not an actual supernatural power. It turns out the Red Skull laced his suit with an electrical current, which caused anybody to touch him to instantly die. With his secret now exposed, the Red Skull makes his escape to the drill, where he brandishes a bomb to finish off Cap and Buck. He launches the bomb at them, but Cap repels the bomb back at the Skull, and it explodes, destroying the drill and killing the Red Skull. We see Cap and Bucky are beaten to within an inch of their lives, but the day has been won and the menace of the Red Skull has been ended forever. So that's it. That's it for this story. And I don't want to linger too much on this character, like all of his history. This is pretty much it. There's not much more than this. Even though he is technically the first rendition of the Red Skull, he is in no way the most prolific or the most dangerous. He lacks the real Red Skull's charisma and his resources. He lacks the Red Skull's intelligence. And at the end of the day, he's nothing but a poser. The history of the Red Skull would continue with Johan Schmidt, who is out there somewhere, you know, planning and being devious. He's just out there committing horrible atrocities that we don't even know about. And his vast intelligent network is secretly manipulating world events, and his unstoppable army of Nazi operatives is causing chaos all over the globe. So having said that, I just want to close by saying it's only a matter of time before his path crosses with Cap's, and it's going to be an epic showdown, unlike anything seen in comics before. But that's a story for another time. As for now, I'm going to call it quits. I'm going to call it quits on this episode. But if you like reading comics with me, you should subscribe and help me grow. In the next episode, we're going to talk about some of Cap's early villains and adventures leading up to the Second Great War. There's some seriously colorful characters in that one, so don't miss it. Also, I make comics you can buy them. Our premiere issue just came out. It's called Vigilance. You could buy it at heroicnerd.com. That really helps. It's also available on Comixology. Until we meet again next time, please keep reading comics.